Hi, I'm Deanna Springer. On behalf of Nancy Zeman Productions and PBS Wisconsin, thank you for joining us for this special educational presentation. Please add your questions for the presenter in the chat and stay tuned for a Q&A after the lecture. Then, be sure to explore everything else the Great Wisconsin Quilt Show has to offer, including beautiful quilt exhibits and an interactive vendor mall. Thank you and enjoy.
Hi, welcome to You Can Quilt As You Go. My name is Chris Kirsch, and I'm excited to be here and share with you some of my favorite Quilt As You Go techniques. So just a little bit about myself to begin with. I'm a quilter from Wisconsin who began quilting in 1987. I've been teaching since the early 90s, and I've taught at the Great Wisconsin Quilt Show every year since it started. I'm a little disappointed this year that we're not seeing each other in person, but I am grateful for this opportunity to share what I want to share with you via the internet. So let's get started. The first question is probably, why would you want to do Quilt As You Go? Well, I think the big advantage to this technique is it allows you to quilt your quilt in small bites that are manageable under the arm of your sewing machine, rather than wrestling a large quilt under that same arm. And so it allows people that just have a regular sewing machine to actually quilt their own quilt. Now, if you like going to a long arm quilter, that's great. But if you want to do it yourself, this might be the technique for you. As we go through this talk, I'm going to be covering things like how to make a small project completely quilt as you go. I'll share how to make larger quilts in small pieces, and then I have a great joining technique. And then I'll also show you two different ways to add borders quilt as you go to quilts that you may not have made with the Quilt As You Go technique. So there's a lot of exciting stuff to come, and I hope you will enjoy it. Let's get started. The first project we're going to talk about is a small project that is done completely quilt as you go. It's a table runner, and you can see the picture shows just a simple table runner, and you may do it either as a chevron pattern or as a braid pattern. If you look at the center square and then the yellow strips off to the side, right now it's a V of yellow, that would be the chevron. But if I had done a different fabric on each side of the center square, you'd end up getting a braid. So we'll be doing the chevron for this project. And the neat thing about this is you can make this runner any size you want. And so I'm not going to be giving you a lot of measurements for it. It's pretty foolproof. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing you want to do is choose the size you want. This runner is 10 by 20. I've cut a piece of backing fabric and a piece of batting fabric exactly that size. And I've laid it on my work surface. If you look at the lower right corner of that picture, you can see that it's the wrong side of my backing fabric. So the backing fabric is wrong side up. And then you lay your batting on top of that evenly. You're going to then take a washable marker and mark center in both directions so that you have those two lines there to orient yourself as we continue. Once you've done that, it's time to pick a fabric for the center of your runner. And this fabric, this is a great place to use a multicolored print and then to draw colors from it for the strips that you add onto it. So let's say this is 10 by 20, and I've cut this center square. What size should I cut it? I need to cut it so the diagonal of my square is my shorter measurement, 10 inches. So if you're making yours larger or smaller, just adjust it for that. Once you've picked that center square, you lay it in place and you line it up with those lines so that you're sure it's centered. I typically then straight pin baste it in place with straight pins, having the heads of the pin on the inside of the square and the points going out, so I don't have to worry about sewing over those those pin heads. So I've got my center square ready to go. I've picked out my strips. We're going to sew a strip on. The next step then is to take your first strip, lay it on that square right sides together with the end of the strip even with the other edge of the center square and the tail of your strip hanging off the project. You are going to sew that on with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then you'll press it open. Finger pressing is fine, but you want to make sure you press it open before you trim the strip, even with the bottom of the table runner batting. If you trim it before you press it open, there's a chance you're going to cut off something you want. So please don't do that. Once you've got that first piece on, it's time to do the other one on the right side of the block. And so you'll take that same strip, you'll lay it on top of the block again with the end of the strip along the end of the unit you're working on and the tail hanging off the side of the batting. Once that is on there, you'll sew it on with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and finger press it open once again. Then it's time to trim. Can you see that on the far right of that last picture? I have those yellow strips hitting exactly on the line that I drew. That's very important because we don't want it to start skewing up or down. If it's not, give it a little muscle and finger press it again to make sure that it stays on the line. So the next step will be to take your next color fabric and add it on. So I've turned this piece around already, but can you imagine if I hadn't rotated it yet? I'd done the yellow and then I added the purple and then I added the pink until I filled my batting. Once the batting is filled, I turn it around and I do exactly the same thing on the opposite side. So the yellow strip is put on in the same way, sewn, pressed open, and then trimmed. And you continue until the entire runner is filled in the way you like it. Now you could put triangles on those corners and finish it as a rectangle, or you can do as I did, trim off the corners so that you get points on the ends of your runner. Either way is fine. If you do the points, the interesting thing is that, and this may not look that way to you, but the points on the right side and the left side are both right angle corners. So when you square this up, you can do it with just a square ruler, and then you're sure to get a nice right angle corner that'll be easier to bind when you're done. Once you've got that trimmed away and you've got your strips on, you'll have it quilted also. Let me show you the back. This picture that I'm sharing now is the back of this piece, and I think if you look closely, you can see the stitching lines that sewed the strips on, but also quilted the quilt. Thus, it's quilt as you go. Once you've got it squared up like this, you put on a binding and you're done. Now, I've had people say to me, can I do this for a bed-sized quilt? That would be so much better. And actually, if you think it through, that would mean that you would have batting and backing for a full-size quilt being shoved under your machine for every piece that you sew on. And that's what we're trying to avoid. So this type of technique works well for small pieces, but it's not going to work well for larger pieces. So here it is one more time, so you can see it with the binding on. Again, simple, fun, and easy. And if your strips are different sizes, it's going to make it look completely different. If your center has a different type of fabric in it, there's so many variables that make this a lot of fun. And I hope you'll play with this technique. So what's next? Well, what if you want to make your quilt in blocks or squares? Quilt those squares, backing, batting, and top, and then put them together with a joining technique. That's what we're going to do now. This is my favorite joining technique, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. I'm going to go to another slide here that'll show you another I Spy quilt that I've done with this. And that first quilt that I shared was my grandson William's quilt, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. This is just a crib size I Spy quilt. So I cut my squares at 6 inches. I layered them, each one with a polka dot batting fabric, and I had many different colorways of this polka dot fabric. So I needed to take all the squares I wanted to make for the reversible quilt and then divide them into 4 piles. And then I backed one of those piles, all of those got backed with the blue, another with all the green, another with all the pink. And then when I laid it out, I actually had to lay it out from the backside, what I consider the backside, so that I got the pattern of those polka dots correct, because it really didn't matter where the I Spy fabrics went. So you'll notice on the quilt, let's look at the quilt on the left. All of those squares were quilted at the size they were meant to be. And then they were butted together tightly with each other. And those gaps then were covered with a 1/2 inch strip of a sashing fabric. The neat thing about this is the seam allowance, if you will, of those blocks fills the sashing area. So it all stays nice and flat and even without any gaps. So I bet you're wondering now, how do you do that joining technique? Well, I think we should do that. But I have one more slide to show you first. This is just a small table topper that I made a number of years ago, and I wanted to have 2 different seasons on it. So it's reversible, front and back. One is autumn, the other is winter. On this autumn side, you'll see that I just picked 4 6-inch autumn fabrics, those squares, and I put them together with this technique. But when I made the squares and quilted them, I actually used the technique for the table runner. Let me show you the other side. This is the winter side of that quilt. And can you see that in each of those squares, there's a triangle towards the center. But on the outside, I've actually strip pieced more fabrics onto it. And so these individual squares have some piecing in them on one side. On the other side, if you look at the autumn quilt, you'll see the stitching. So the quilt as you go stitching, just like with the runner, gives you quilting on the other side. Once those 4 squares were made, I put them together using the technique I'm going to now share with you. So what you'll need to do this is your squares quilted and squared up to the proper size. And then you're going to need to choose a fabric for the sashing on the front and a fabric for the sashing on the back. The front fabric for my quilt, I'm doing this I Spy quilt, is going to be the dark blue strips that you see to the far left. And then the fabric for the sashing on the back of the quilt will be the light blue strips. These strips have to be cut exactly the right size. So you're going to want those numbers. And here they are. No matter what size your quilt is, if you're doing this 1/2 inch sashing, the front sashing will need to be cut 1 3/4 inch wide, and you need to cut it with a fabric from salvage to salvage, as many strips as you'll need to get the right number to put together all the blocks in your quilt. Once you've got those strips cut, you'll press them lengthwise in half, wrong sides together. So you're just folding that long strip in half, pressing it. Then whatever size your squares were, my squares were 5 inches, and that's edge to edge. That's what size I'm going to cross cut those sashing strips. So if you look at those sashing strips, they're all cut 5 inches long and they've been pressed in half. The next pile is the light blue. Those are the sashing strips for the back, and they won't be folded in half. And they need to be cut with a fabric at 1 1/8 inch. Now I know you're all rolling your eyes because quilters do not like to cut in 1/8 inch increments. But you need to trust me on this. If you cut these strips accurately, you're going to get good results. So just kind of bite the bullet and cut them at 1 1/8. Once you've cut your strips with the fabric, then cross cut again at the measurement of your block. So these would be cross cut at 5 inches. Now that we've got everything ready to go, how do we sew them on? This is the fun part. So you'll notice the block in the lower left. I have a yellow I Spy block for my grandson Willie's quilt. I quilted all of the squares in his quilt with a W. Go figure. You'll never guess what his sister Hannah's blocks were quilted with. Yeah, an H. You can quilt it with anything you want, an X, a spiral, whatever you desire. So all of my blocks are quilted and squared up, and they are all 5 inch squares, edge to edge. And the other side of this block has a Spider-Man fabric on it. You can't see it, trust me. I'm going to take one of the dark blue strips that has the fold in it, and I'm going to lay it along the right side, raw edges even, and the fold towards the inside. And I didn't do it on this picture, but I would recommend putting a couple pins in because there's going to be a lot of layers. Then I choose one of the sashing strips, the lighter blue strips, and I'm going to lay that on the bottom, right sides together with the Spider-Man fabric. I'll repin to make sure everything's nice and straight, and then it's time to sew it. You'll notice I have my walking foot on, and that's because there's actually 7 layers that we are going to be quilting through, and things will shift if you don't use a walking foot. I don't even find that my even feed foot on my machine does as well as a walking foot. So if you have one, please use it. Use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We'll adjust that in a minute if you question that, but just use a 1/4 inch seam allowance at this time. So you sew that whole strip on, or both of those strips on. And then the next step is to take that light blue strip, and you're actually going to fold it open. So you're seeing the wrong side of the light blue strip. And then you lay that whole unit on top of the next square that you've quilted. And you want that next square to be back side up or Spider-Man side up. So I took the Spider-Man block and I laid it down. I pulled open that light blue strip so that I could line it up with an edge of my Spider-Man square. And then I did a few pins along there. And then I sewed that with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now you may have to, as I have done in the picture, you may have to pull back the previous seam allowance to make sure that your walking foot will fit in there while you do this. And then you go ahead and stitch with your 1/4 inch seam allowance the entire strip on. Try to imagine with me now that when you open out those 2 blocks with the I Spy side out, that skinny strip of sashing on the back will pull taut. The seam allowances from the block will lay flat on top of it, and you'll have a nice flat area to cover with the folded strip. If you do this step and you've got a gap, it means your seam allowance was a little too scant. So go ahead and adjust it at that point and make sure you have it right for the rest of the project. If you open it up and you find the seam allowances of those two blocks are overlapping, that means that your seam allowance was a little too chunky and you need to do a little narrower seam allowance. This is the time to adjust the seam allowance. And once you do and you get it to lay butted, the rest of the project will be a dream. So the next picture is going to show from the I Spy side of the quilt. If you look at the two blocks to the top of that picture, you'll notice that they are laid down. They're not quite pulled taut. I should have, I didn't, so that the seam allowances are budding. And you can see that light blue strip has a little bubble in it. But once you pull it taut, everything's going to fit well. Then all that's left to do is fold that folded strip of front sashing fabric over it and stitch it down. So you can see I'm folding with my finger that strip over the seam allowances on the top, while that sashing on the back is holding everything in place. I then am going to stitch that down with my walking foot again. And I like to use a serpentine stitch or a zigzag or one of the decorative stitches on my machine as opposed to a straight stitch, because this stitching is going to show on the other side. And if you use the straight stitch, it might not line up with the seam perfectly and it won't look as nice. But by using a decorative stitch or a serpentine in a matching thread to match the color on top and on the bottom, it won't be very obvious and the strips will look great. So let's do a close-up of that. If you look at this piece, you can see my serpentine, my S-shaped stitch from my machine, and it holds everything down securely, and it's going to look just as good on the back as it does on the front. So that's how you join these pieces together. Let's look at this big quilt. This is my granddaughter Hannah's quilt. I made her an I Spy bed quilt too. This is twin size, just like Willie's was. And can you see when I put this together, some of my squares are 5 inches, but some of them are 10 inches? Doesn't matter. As long as it's a multiple of the original block, you can intersperse different size blocks, which adds a lot of interest also. And you're still just quilting the smaller blocks. What we'll do then is, when I was showing you how to put the strips together side to side, we're creating a row. But we want now to put the rows together. So you are going to cut your sashing strips as long as your rows are. You may have to piece your sashing strips to make them, but they're not going to be chopped into little pieces. They'll be as long as the row. And then the technique is the same for putting the top row onto the next row. Just do it the same way. It's just going to be a longer seam. And this is the back of Hannah's quilt, so you can really see the 10-inch squares as compared to the 5-inch squares. And the sashing, just you plug it in where you need it to make it fit. It's a very user-friendly technique. What else could you do with this technique? Well, I'm glad you asked. The next quilt I'm going to show you is one that was made by my friend Wendy Reeves. Wendy and I travel together. We take groups of quilters on tours together, and she's just a very talented quilter. Well, she started making t-shirt quilts using this technique. And what's great about that is, if you've ever made a t-shirt quilt, number one, you're going to realize that once you get all those t-shirts sewn together, you've got to get that whole thing under your sewing machine again, and that it's always a problem. So usually it goes to a long armor. But if you make each t-shirt block separately, you can just have fun with it because it's small enough not to fight back, and do it all yourself, which I think is a benefit. Now look at that t-shirt quilt a little more closely. Can you see that it's made in columns, vertical columns? And so all of the t-shirts were cut the same width, which typically for t-shirts is about 14 inches unless you're doing children. But if the motif was longer on some and shorter on others, Wendy was able to adjust the length of those blocks. So she cut the blocks out to fit her the t-shirts she was working with. And of course, you have to put a stabilizer on the back. I'm assuming you already knew that. Then she took that, backed it with whatever fabric she wanted on the back, put batting in between them, quilted those, and she put the joinings together to make the long columns. And then the long columns were put together with long sashing strips, just like we talked about previously, to make the whole quilt. Once the blocks were put together, it just needed a binding or a border, but we're not there yet. Wendy had one more slide she sent me of another t-shirt quilt she made from Packer fabric. And this is kind of fun because the Packer fabrics we have lots of those. If you're a Wisconsinite, you almost have to. And this quilt is different in that it's made in squares. So it's done more like the I Spy quilts I did, but still using that narrow 1/2-inch sashing. There is a way to do this with a wider sashing, but for the video we're doing today, there just isn't enough time for me to cover that. And if you want to know more about that, you can always contact me. I'll give you my contact information at the end of the talk. I have one more quilt I want to share with you that used this technique in rectangles. This was made by my dear friend, Jean Casey. She had a friend of hers ask her if Jean would make a quilt for her because her husband had passed away. And he was a businessman who wore button-down shirts, and he loved to have fun ties. So Jean told her she would make her a shirt and tie quilt. She made it in blocks, which made the quilting of it so much easier because she likes to do free motion quilting. She doesn't realize she's as good a quilter as she is, so she's kind of hesitant. But by being able to do it in small blocks, it went together quite well. Do you see that she even included the collars of the shirts in the block? I thought that was a really clever idea. And then she put all of the shirts on and used the joining or all of the ties on, and used the joining technique to put them together. And then she used leftovers from his shirts to do the border. It's just a delightful quilt. And I'd like to show you a close-up of 2 of the blocks here. I just cropped in on them to give you an idea of how much fun she had with the quilting. For the Packer tie, here we go with Packers again, she quilted in words. I love to quilt words on my quilts. You don't have to think about where you're going next because we all know how to write. And her footballs may not be perfectly shaped, but they're fun and they fit the feel of that block. So I think that's just delightful. In the other block that I chose, it's the tie contains trains. And so Jean looked at that and went, I want the quilting to go with the trains. And she decided to do railroad tracks. And isn't that just fun? She didn't do it with a walking foot, so she got them perfectly straight. She made them kind of free and easy, and I just think it makes it so interesting. I can tell you, Jean would never have made this quilt and quilted it herself if she'd had to have done it full size. So I'm really glad she was able to use this joining technique to put them together. So I think we'll move on. Oh, one more use for this technique. You may have noticed the quilt behind me. This quilt was made, and it's the one you're seeing in the PowerPoint also. This quilt was made from blocks I collected, exchanged in a 5-inch lunch bunch block exchange in my guild years ago. We all decided that every week or every month after we had our quilt meeting, we would go out to lunch and we would pick a theme each month, and we'd make every person in the group, there were 6 of us, blocks to fit that theme. So we had trees and we had applique and we had all sorts of fun things. Those blocks sat in a pile for a long time. And then my friend Sharon Rhodes wrote a book on log cabin quilts with attitude, where she did funky things using up her leftover strips to make log cabin blocks around whatever centers you want. So this is the quilt I made from that. It is a full-size quilt. And I think you'll notice again that it was made, and maybe you won't because it's pretty busy, that it was made in vertical columns. Now you might say to me, how can you tell it's made in vertical columns because it's so busy? Well, the reason is the strips I used for the top sashing, I actually used scrap strips too and mixed them up to add to the effect. So let's look at a close-up of that. If you look at this photograph, you'll see, hopefully, in the center, the tall vertical 1/2-inch wide strip. On the top, it's black. There's a mitered seam sewing that black strip to the purpley pink strip. And that's the strip that I use to cover the seam allowance between those columns. So each of the blocks in that quilt was cut or trimmed up, squared up to the same exact width. But some of them were longer or shorter than the others. And it didn't really matter, except when it came to the bottom. If you look at the bottom of the full quilt slide, you'll see that I actually, instead of hacking them all up, I bound them in that interesting way. And when it hangs off the end of the bed, it's interesting. It adds a unique touch to the quilt. So this quilt has been a lot of fun to have out on the bed, and it's fun to look at because there's so much going on. When I put this together, because it's reversible, I could have put all the backings the same and you'd never have known that there was what was going on, that it was Quilt As You Go. But I decided to do every other row with a different fabric. And this is the back of that quilt. I actually just added this photo today. I snuck around the other side of the quilt behind me and took the picture. But you'll see I used a green fabric and a gold fabric. And I just alternated the rows so that you can tell it's quilt as you go in the back. It adds interest. I'm not sure it's reversible and I want to put this side up because the other side's so interesting, but it is an interesting thing to do. It's a fun thing to do. So now let's move on to adding borders to small quilts. If you've ever wanted to make a small quilt and you get the center of it done and it's time to add the borders, what do? You sew on the borders, then you layer it with batting and backing and quilt it. And typically you need to stitch in the ditch or 1/4 of an inch away from the ditch in order to quilt around the block. Well, if you do it quilt as you go, you'll save yourself the hassle of stitching in the ditch, which personally is one of my least favorite ways to quilt a quilt. And so let's do this. To begin with, you'll decide what size you want the finished quilt to be with the borders, and you'll cut a piece of backing and batting at that size, just like we did with the small runner. You'll then set that piece of backing fabric wrong side up on your work surface and layer your batting on top, again, the same way. Once you've done that, center your block, whether it's a piece block or whatever it is, center it in the middle and pin it in place. And then we're going to add the borders just as if we were adding strips to that center of the runner. So I took a piece of my brown fabric, cut the same height as my center and whatever width I want the border to be. I'd lay it on right sides together, stitch it with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and press it flat, fold it over and press it flat. From there, I can add the right side border. And so that gets sewn on the same way. And then we do the same thing top and bottom. So on that picture, you can see that the strip was put on top and bottom and sewn with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then once we fold those open and press them, we've got a framed, bordered, small project, and I don't have to go back and stitch in the ditch. I would go back on this project and quilt around my coneflowers or quilt something in the sky, whatever you want to do in the inside of your quilt. If you need some quilting in the border, this would be the time to do that also. Then square the whole thing up and add your binding. One other thing you can do this way is, as long as you cut your backing and batting wide enough or big enough, you could put a double border on. Let's say you wanted to do a 1-inch border in yellow first. Well, add it just the way I did this brown border. Once that whole border is put on, then go back and add the brown border the same. You can put multiple borders on as long as you started with the backing and batting large enough for all those borders. It's a fun way to do a small project. But now, what if you wanted to add a border to a larger quilt? I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but I have on occasion made a bed-size quilt twice, where I got the quilt all done and quilted, whether I did it myself or you send it to a long armor, and I got it back so that I could put the binding on, only to realize that when I put it on the bed, I really wished the quilt was a little bigger, that another 4-inch border or 6-inch border all the way around would make it look better. And you know, sometimes when you quilt it shrinks things up too, and things aren't quite as long as you'd like them to be. So let's talk about adding borders to a finished quilt. This doesn't have to be, but not a bound quilt. This doesn't have to be a quilt that was done with the quilt as you go technique. It could be any quilt you've ever made that needed a border added after it was quilted. And so what we're going to do, and I'm just doing it on a small project, but this could be done on a king size quilt. You still will have to sew it onto the king size quilt, but because you're working on the edge, all the bulk will be on the table to the left, and you want a table to the left to support it. And so it still is very doable even on your home sewing machine. You're not fighting the arm of the machine being too small. So let's talk about this. What you're going to need to do, I'm putting this top border on this finished and quilted quilt. It's just a sample, but I think you get it. I'm going to cut a piece of my top border fabric exactly the width of my quilt top and whatever, or exactly the length for the strip and exactly the width I want my border to be. And so this piece was cut to fit. It's about a 4-inch border on about a 20-inch piece. I've laid that on there right sides together and I put a couple pins in to hold. I'm going to also cut at that same measurement the back border and the batting. So now I can flip that piece over and lay the back border right sides together with the back of the quilt and put a couple more pins in. And then I'm going to lay my batting strip that was cut the same size directly on top of that and pin through all of the layers. This then can be taken to the sewing machine And you'll see we have about as many layers as we did when we did the joining technique. So you want to pin it well, and you want to use that walking foot so that nothing shifts on you. And you can sew this border on with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. In the next photo, you can see that's exactly what I'm doing. And once I get that sewn on, you're going to take those 3 border pieces and you're going to actually fold them over on top of each other to make a border. At that point, I like to use an iron. Even a steam iron is helpful to really make that a nice, crisp fold over. And you can see in the picture, the back border fabric is underneath the batting strip, and I'm folding down the top border fabric on top of it. And that's what it looks like from the side. At this point, if you want to quilt that border, you may, or you could quilt all the borders at the same time. But if you're not going to quilt it, make sure you pin it well along the edge so nothing shifts, because the side that I'm showing you in this photo is going to be sewed into the next border. So you're going to do that same thing now for the opposite border from the one you just sewed, and then you'll do the 2 side borders exactly the same way. And once you've done that, if you need to quilt the borders at that time, you may, and then it's time to add your binding. Hopefully that made sense to you. Otherwise, watch the video again. And now we're going to move on to talk just for a moment again about that, the quilt I have already showed you. This is a repeat slide, I know, but I want you to see that when I made this I Spy quilt, Quilt As You Go, I then had to add borders. And if you do it Quilt As You Go, there's no other way to add borders but Quilt As You Go. So this technique worked well for this. If you look at the quilt on the left, you'll see that I quilted this with black thread, and I actually quilted the words for the things the child is supposed to look for in the I Spy quilt. I quilted those into the border. Now you might say, oh my goodness, if it's reversible on the other side, those words are going to be backwards. Well, that's why I use black thread and a black border on the back of the quilt, so that the quilting is not obvious there, but that the words are easy to read from the front. If you know how to read cursive, this was Grandma's way of hoping that her grandchildren, my grandchildren, will learn to read cursive, because it's very hard to print with free motion quilting. So it made it just a lot of fun. And I think it makes for a cheery quilt. You will find that right next to where the binding or the border is sewn onto the quilt, that there's a little bit of thickness there because of the extra seam allowance. And some people like to trim that out, but I think that actually weakens the quilt. So what I typically do is quilt a 1/2 inch quilting line, a 1/2 inch away from the center of the quilt. And that captures those seam allowances, gives it kind of a trapunto look. And it actually is kind of a nice effect. We make lemonade out of those lemons. So the other thing I want to share with you is this. I've shown you all of the techniques that I'm able to put into this video, but if you find that you're doing Quilt As You Go and you want to do more, I highly recommend June Taylor's Quilt As You Go projects. I used to work for June Taylor, and I've actually designed a few of these projects for them. So I still do work for them once in a while. And this is just a brilliant product. They have come up with so many different things you can do, whether it's a tree skirt or a bib or a doggy placemat or a table runner. They pre-print the batting with your alignment line. So when you put your strip on, you know to put where exactly to put it. And you can make a project in a very short amount of time, and their instructions are quite good. So if you find you like this, that's a great way to do it. And on that note, you can quilt as you go. And I hope you will. This is a fun and wonderful technique. It doesn't work for every quilt, but the quilts that it does work for can be fantastic. And then I'd like also to add my contact information. My website is chrisquilts.net. My blog is chrisquilts.net/blog. I have a blog that I've posted to every week for almost 12 years now. And it's always something to do with quilting. Oftentimes it's step-by-step instructions for different things that I like to do, whether it's mitering a border or whatever. All of the slides you saw today are on my blog because I've covered these topics on my blog. So if a couple weeks from now you go, how do I add that border quilt as you go? If you go to my blog and in the search box put in Quilt As You Go borders, that step-by-step tutorial will pop up for you, and you can put your border on in the comfort of your own home with the instructions right there. So I hope you'll visit my blog. If you find that you like it and you'd like to get an email every week to find out what's going on every week, please just drop me an email or subscribe on the blog, and you can visit with me every week and learn what I'm up to. And with that, I just want to thank you for tuning in for this and for being a supporter of the Great Wisconsin Quilt Show. And you've been a blessing to me. Thank you so much. And remember, you can quilt as you go.
Hi, I'm Deanna Springer. Thank you for joining us for the Great Wisconsin Quilt Show. And thank you for tuning in for You Can Quilt As You Go with Chrislyn Kirsch. And we're so pleased today to have Chris here with us from her studio in Wisconsin. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm so grateful to be a part of this first day of the Great Wisconsin Quilt Show.
We're excited to have you and so grateful for your support of the show. And we have lots of questions rolling in, Chris, about your Quilt As You Go technique. So we're going to get started with those questions.
Okay.
Lots of viewers are asking, is there a pattern or class notes for what you're teaching today?
I don't really have a written pattern that you can get, but as I said at the end of my lecture, you can go to my blog at chrisquilts.net/blog and type into the search engine any of the topics that I talked about, and the step-by-steps will show up there. Otherwise, you can always rewatch my lecture, and that's going to be available through PBS. So, yeah.
Thanks, Chris. The next question is from a viewer watching in Minnesota. How wide are the strips cut in your chevron table runner?
Well, in that particular table runner, I think my strips were cut at 2 inches. But the neat thing about that project is that you can cut them any size you want, and you can even make them different sizes. So it's really kind of a freeing sort of a project, depending on what size you want your finished runner to be.
Thank you, Chris. And Michelle is asking, if we are doing the braided style table runner, would we be using a different color in placement, different placements of colored fabrics?
Yes. On my runner that I did the demo with, the same color was used on step 1 and step 2 on both sides of this block. But if you would make them 2 different colors, that gives you the effect of the braid. And if you keep the colors on one side of the braid, say dark, and the colors on the other side light, that can even make it more interesting.
Great tips. And Nancy is asking, can you please demonstrate how you join the blocks with the sashing?
I was hoping you would ask that. That was the one technique that I shared that is just easier to see when things move and it's not static. So I brought my little samples along. So here we have one of my squares that's quilted and ready to go. I have the skinnier strip, the flat strip here, and I have the strip that was wider and folded over here. So what I do is I layer the skinny strip against the back fabric of the square. I lay the folded over strip against the front fabric of the square. So all the raw edges end up even here, and there are 7 layers there. That's why I use the walking foot. You then stitch that with your 1/4 inch seam allowance, and when you open up the skinny strip, the back strip, it looks like this. I'm then able to take my next square, and let's say this is the side I'm going to call the back. The back side then will just match up with that skinny strip. I'll line it up that way, and then I'm able to sew that strip to the next block. What's neat about that is once that strip has been sewn to the second block, then when you open them up, that strip turns flat here, and on this side, those seam allowances butt right up to each other, and I had it covered, I'm sorry. Those seam allowances butt right up to each other, and they provide the batting and filling in that narrow sashing so that when you fold the strip over, there's no gaps. It's nice and full. So I'm hoping that by seeing this as a video where you can actually see the blocks come together, it makes it a little more clear.
That surely helps demonstrate your technique, Chris, and the live Q&A will be recorded. It's being recorded right now, so when we rewatch your video, you'll be able to see Chris hold those samples up and show us that technique. And lots of great comments coming in, Chris, about loving your technique. And Dorothy is saying, I wish I knew this technique a year ago. I will be using it from now on.
Great, Dorothy.
Feriel is asking, she would love the echinacea quilt pattern. Where can I find it?
Oh, thank you for asking that. That actually was a pattern in my first book, Replique Quilts. And that book went out of print many years ago, and I bought up residuals and sold all of those. But I recently received the rights to that book, and I'm going to be, I'm writing a new book. In fact, it's in the editing stage right now, and all of that information will be in there on how to do my replique technique. So if you sign up for my blog, chrisquilts.net, /blog, or just go to my website, chrisquilts.net, and sign up to hear from me regularly. As soon as that book is available, I'm self-publishing this one, I will be broadcasting it there, and you'll be able to be one of the first ones to purchase it.
Great tip. We'll sign up and make sure we're in the know when you release your next book. That's exciting news, Chris. Thanks for sharing that. And a question from Doris. The thing she never understood about Quilt As You Go is that it seems like the backstitching would be unfinished seams. Do you backstitch, Chris?
That's a very good question. I used to always backstitch, but you're right. Then on the back of the quilt, you see that little double stitching over, and it doesn't look as nice. It's on the back. No one sees it. It's not that critical. But I discovered recently that little magic lock stitch on your machine, if you have that on your machine, is a great way to go just to do some securing. But even if you don't do that, if you just start, because everything is underneath the next piece of fabric, there's nowhere for it to come apart. And it really holds together quite well, even if you don't backstitch.
Great. And Barb Ross is asking, could you please remind us what size of the front folded and back strips are?
Oh my goodness. I'm sorry, I don't have that on the top of my head. I'd have to rewatch the video. So,
And
but
the
if you go
strips
to
are
my
with
blog,
you. You have the strips
and the
with
strips
you.
are with me. Oh, thank you. I believe the folded one was 1 3/4. Yes, and the back one was 1 1/8. Thank you, Deanna.
Visual reminders. Thank you, Chris. We know it's at your blog site too. So great question, Barb, and great quizzing of Chris's memory too.
Yeah, you knew it was live, right?
Right. And another comment from a viewer in West Virginia. She loves the serpentine stitch when you're quilting. More of a comment than a question. So use those decorative stitches.
Yes,
Becky,
the serpentine is my favorite. Zigzags just don't look as pleasing to me, so I agree.
the curves. A viewer is also asking about, thank you for this great info. On the quilt behind you, did you free motion quilt each block with a different pattern? And Becky on Facebook is asking about your quilt.
Yes, actually I did. I loved a free motion quilt. And that's the one downside of Quilt As You Go. It's all straight line, but it's a great technique. So I made the quilt behind me in long strips, the whole length of the quilt. And then I did just some fun, I used walking foot, but I just kind of let the lines weave down the whole length of it and threw in a couple stars or whatever went along with the blocks as I went. So I just had a lot of fun because I was only quilting something 10 inches wide. And so it wasn't a struggle to get it under the machine.
And we have several viewers asking, including a viewer in Minnesota and Terry on YouTube. Explain again, please, the 7 layers in the blocks. And Terry's saying, and show how the second block is attached, please.
I would be happy to do that again. So here is my little sample. You start with just the block. Then you start with your 1 1/8 inch flat strip that's not folded over. And your folded over 1 3/4 inch strip. The 1 1/8 strip goes against the back side of the block, whatever you think is the back of your quilt. The folded over strip goes against the right side of the block, whatever you think is the front of the quilt. You lay those strips even. That gives you the 7 layers, 2 layers for the first strip, the outside fabric for your quilt block, the batting, the back fabric for your quilt block, and the last strip. Once you've got them all lined up, I usually put a few pins in and then sew that with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once that's sewn, I can take the skinny strip, the non-folded over one, and fold it open. Now, if I do it this way, that might be even more helpful. Grab my next block, put the back side of this block against that strip. Now, it's a skinny strip, but when I turn this around, you can see that by folding the seam allowance up from the previous one, I have a very easy time sewing that with a 1/4 inch seam. And what happens then is when I open it up, it flattens out and makes the sashing on the back of the block. And on the other side, I'm gonna get it right this time, when those seam allowances butt together, that's what fills in behind the sashing strip. The sashing strip folds over, and that's where I use my serpentine or my decorative stitch to stitch it down. And those stitches look good front and back, whereas if you tried to just top stitch, you probably would fall out of the ditch and it wouldn't look as good on the other side. Hopefully that helped.
Thanks for the review, Chris. It helped. Great job. A couple more comments and questions. Kitty Ann on Facebook is sharing, I need to try this technique, and she loves your necklace.
Oh, thank you. I always like to buy things and encourage artists at art fairs, and I love this one, and my husband's like, it's yours.
Wow, great find. We have a viewer on YouTube asking, Chris, when did you begin to quilt and who inspired you? And that's from Lori Dickman.
Hi, Lori. Everybody watch her video. She's next. I learned to quilt in 1987, a very long time ago, because my sister-in-law talked me into taking a class. Mary Sue never finished that first quilt, and I became addicted. And I've loved it ever since, and I love all aspects of quilting. I have this memory for tips and techniques, and I love to share. So it's a blessing, and I praise God for it.
Love your teaching techniques. It's so great to take in your classes, Chris. Another comment from Teresa in Wisconsin. This is awesome. I'm already thinking of several projects that I will use these techniques for. And a big thank you with 5 exclamation points.
Woo! Thank you, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed.
And this is from a comment from Michelle. She never imagined that she would be able to quilt so creatively on her little home sewing machine. This could be a game changer for her, she's sharing. So thank you for showing us these techniques we can do on our domestic sewing machines.
I love that. That was the reason I named the lecture, You Can Quilt As You Go, because I have so many students that are like, oh, big quilts, I can't do it. I can't. I just have to pay somebody. And I have nothing against long armors. They're wonderful. We need to support them. But sometimes it's nice to be able to do it all yourself.
Well, you surely have given us the inspiration to do so, Chris. And we love seeing your quilts. And we'll be sure to head over to your blog site and share that website with us again so we can sign up for your e-news and watch for all the new things you're coming out with.
Well, my website is Chris Quilts, and I spell it CHRIS, quilts.net. And from there, you can get to my blog and see all the quilts in my gallery and all my classes. I travel and do workshops, so please visit my blog and send me an email and let me know that you enjoy.
We look forward to staying in touch, and thank you so much, Chris, for making time for sharing your thoughts with us during this live Q&A and for sharing all your techniques in your presentation today.
It was my pleasure, Deanna. Thanks for inviting me. God bless. Bye.
And thank you, everyone, for tuning in for the Great Wisconsin Quilt Show. And be sure to head over to quiltshow.com and visit all the vendors in the vendor mall. And make sure to visit and view all of the special quilt exhibits. They're just beautiful. Enjoy. Thanks again for joining us. This year's educational presentations are made possible with your contributions. Your support helps us offer a free and accessible online experience where we can celebrate our shared love of quilting. Please help PBS Wisconsin bring back the event next year stronger than ever by making a gift today. You can donate on our website or text QUILT to 1-800-236-3636 to make a gift from your phone. Your generosity makes a difference. Thank you.